Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another hour of Health Conclusions, where we try to give our listeners important information on nutrition, exercise, and holistic, alternative, and integrative medicine. Please take a minute to visit our website at www.healthconclusions.com and like us on Facebook. My name is Bob Neugebauer, and I will be your host for this evening's show. Tonight's show is being brought to you by Altrua Health Share, which has been serving its members and their families with their health care needs since 1997. Please take a moment to visit their website at altruahealthshare.org or call 888-244-3839 to see just what Altrua Health Share can offer your family for the health care needs. It could mean substantial savings. Our guest for this evening is Bill Stafford, who is the owner of something called All About Water. His company does water testing, consulting, water filters for your home and office, just about anything you can think about with water. Bill's involved in. Now, many of you may be thinking to yourselves, why would we want to listen to a guy talk about water? Well, that's a good question. Mr. Stafford's business is knowing all about water, so we have invited him here this evening to explain why it is so important to understand about the water you use every day in your home and at work. Just think for a minute about 60% of the human body that's made up of water. In fact, without water, we could not exist. So it stands to reason that if we are 60% water, shouldn't we understand what we are putting into our bodies each and every day when we drink a glass of water from the water taps? So, Bill, good evening, and thank you so much for coming down here to spend some time explaining this to us. How long have you been in the water business, and can you tell us why you got into this business?
Well, thank you, Bob. Been in the business for now 12 years, and I have to give credit to divine intervention because, trust me, I didn't think I was going to ever get in this kind of business, but it was out of need of looking for clean water. When I moved out here 12 years ago, I was looking for a source and never could find a good source. So I figured, well, the only way to do it is do it myself. And that's
let me interrupt you here for a minute.
Yeah.
You said you couldn't find a good source of water.
Correct.
To use.
Right.
And we're living in Idaho.
I'm a water snob.
I see. So, okay. Well, maybe we can get into why this water wasn't good for you. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, taste was one thing, but my background was testing water. So I knew how to test water, so I went around to all the vending machines I could find. I tested all the bottled waters, and I just wasn't happy with the results. The inconsistency of the quality was just, it was just above and beyond. So I just kind of gave up on it and decided, well, the only way to do it is do it myself. And so I developed a machine with an engineer, and that's where it started.
So you have a machine that tells you whether the water is any good.
Correct.
But, I mean, you also taste it, right? I mean, it's not just the machine.
Yeah, it's definitely a palate.
So there's a human factor in here.
Correct.
Okay, we don't want to just deal with machines here, right?
You're correct.
From your standpoint, how important is the quality of the water that we drink every day?
Well, very important in my mind, not only the taste, but if water doesn't taste good, people aren't going to drink enough of it. Psychologically, if you go to the tap and it smells like chlorine, you're going to drink enough to satisfy your thirst, but you're really not going to get enough to hydrate yourself because your unconscious mind is saying, you really don't want to do this. So it's pretty important to keep the toxins and what we call the foreign substances out of the water, chlorines, the whatever chemicals are in there, arsenic, nitrates. Our body has to work overtime in order to take care of those. Liver, kidneys, bladder, that's our filtration system. And if we keep running these toxins through the filtration system, we're naturally going to wear it out.
But isn't it the case that most people, they don't even think about it when they go and grab a glass of water? You get so used to the taste of the chlorine that it's not even something that affects you when you're drinking your water anymore. Isn't that correct?
Right, and some people, what they do is they try to doctor it up, and they'll add additives to the water to make it taste good, or they'll get fooled by like a refrigerator filter, which the biggest comment I get is when I ask somebody, do you have filtration in your house? And they'll say, oh, yeah, we have a refrigerator filter. Very basic filtration, doesn't take anything, but it changes the taste of the chlorine enough where it's somewhat palatable.
You know, that's funny. I just received a letter from my a Whirlpool dealer telling me it's time to change my filter, and for $42 they will send me a new filter.
Yeah.
But I learned a long time ago that for some reason these filters always seem to run out in the same amount of time or close to the same amount of time, even if we're not using water from it. So it's got to tell me that this is all a big hoax. Is this true? I mean, is this just a lot of baloney? They're not really filtering anything in essence.
That's mostly true. That's true. What really happens is that any layer of filtering you do, including a refrigerator filter, does something to the water. It takes something out. But it's very basic, and if you follow the money, you'll understand why refrigerators have filters in them.
Well, I follow the money because I paid for them for many, many years until I finally figured out that this was pretty much another hoax and they weren't really doing me much good. But it took a little investigating to figure that out first. When you test a customer's water, what are you looking for in the results?
Well, it depends on what the customer's asking for. Typically, we'll start out trying to find out what are the nuisance things in water. Nuisance things meaning the hardness of water, the iron stains, the mineral and lime deposits. That's typically what people are calling. They're not really thinking about the health effects of it typically. They're always usually thinking about the cosmetic part of the water and the damage it's doing to their appliances. Then we move into testing the water further for more health effects. I'm finding more and more people are more conscious about the quality of water. So they're asking for better filtration for the actual drinking part of the water.
So when you go in, you're testing for hardness, you're testing for chlorine. Are you testing for minerals too?
Well, the minerals are part of what we call the hardness, or the TDS, which is total dissolved solids.
Right.
That's one of the tests we do. And that kind of gives us an idea, which is mainly just for the equipment that we would be installing so it lasts long enough. We need to know the levels of those foreign substances in the water. If we get into more of the health issues, we don't do the testing locally. We send it out either to, when I say locally, we don't test it in our lab. We send it to a lab in Boise, or we send it out of state.
Well, when you're talking about health issues, what type of health issues are we talking about?
Well, when you're dealing with heavy metals, you're dealing with, we do have out here, it's pretty plentiful. You have arsenic, you have nitrates, you have radiologicals like uranium, and you have radon. Those are the big ones that I always test for, especially if it's a private well, because those things are going to affect the health right away.
I always understood radon to be a gas.
Correct.
And how do you find it in the water? Does it permeate the water?
Yes. In other words, if you have a high enough of uranium, you're definitely going to have radon. You're going to have radon in the air, and you're going to have radon in the water. And it's a special test, and it's pretty expensive to do. And there's only a couple labs that do it.
So we actually have a lot of potential different problems with water out here. Now I understand what you said earlier, that you were looking for good water for 11 years.
Correct. Right.
Okay. Well, evidently you may have found some.
Yeah.
What are the different tests you do? And as far as our municipal water is concerned, what is the quality of it?
Well, you got to remember, we're on well water out here. We run out of aquifers and the different underground water sources. So typically, we've got to remember, whatever was on the ground for hundreds of years can leach into the aquifer, and especially in modern times and with the population explosion out here, our water tables are depleting. So therefore, you're getting a lot more substances of water. A lot of it is natural occurring. The uranium we talk about is a natural occurring uranium. The nitrates are usually from fertilizers and farming and cattle, and those type things we need to test for, and we need to eliminate them with the filtration.
Well, don't tell Hillary Clinton about the uranium we have in our water. She'll be out here taking it away from us or selling it to the Russians. What are the most frequent problems you run into, and when you find a problem with some of this water, how do you deal with it? How do you deal with something like radon? That's a gas permeating into your water. I mean, do you have to drill a new well or what?
Well, that's always a possibility. You can. That's not always a good solution because it depends on what depths there are. As we look at the layers, it depends on how far the uranium is. Radon can be fairly off-gassed before it goes into the house. So you would have a system that would off-gas the water. It would run it through a system and off-gas it before it goes in. So you'd lose the radon. But the uranium is the culprit because uranium is accumulative. So you can't take uranium out of in large quantities. Otherwise, you have a radiological hazard. So you have to do small quantities of the uranium. And again, in some areas, it's 3 times to 4 times the amount allowed by the DEQ or the EPA.
You mean taking it out of the water?
Right. Yeah. Once you take the uranium out, you have to dispose of it at a radiological hazard plant.
All right, we're going to have to take a quick break. We'll be back in a few minutes. You're listening to Health Conclusions, brought to you by Altrua Health Share with your host, Bob Neugebauer, on 580 KIDO AM and 107.5 FM. Welcome back to Health Conclusions on 580 KIDO. We're speaking with Bill Stafford of All About Water, sponsored by Altrua Health Care on 580 KIDO AM and 107.5 FM. So, Bill, we were talking about radioactive water and how you dispose of it. A question for you is water softeners that they put on their systems. People are always putting water softeners on, and I could never understand why, because they get all of that salt into the system, and then you're washing with the salt. Instead of the chlorine, I guess sometimes you're washing with the salt, neither one of which I believe is good for your skin. But what do you think about water softeners? How do you feel about those in terms of the water systems in your house?
Well, again, water softeners are, in our opinion, are a good thing, mainly for your appliances, because the hard water, when it gets anywhere near, when it gets over what we call 3 or 4 grains of hardness, you're going to start seeing it damaging appliances. Typically, water heaters, washing machines, and dishwashers are the first things that get taken out from the calcium, magnesium, and lime that stays in the water. So a softener takes care of the nuisances. Also, actually, a soft water is much better on your hair and your skin. You'll feel much better. People sometimes complain about a slickness on their skin, thinking that something's retained, and it is retained, but it's the natural oils have not been pulled out by the hard water. It's just like putting cement or clay on your skin. And if you do that long enough and you pull it off, then the skin's real dry because it's actually pulled out the natural oils. So softeners do have a benefit that way, and they also take out a certain amount of the chlorine in just the process of the softening. But now the good question that you asked was, as far as drinking the water, the new systems that are out today don't leave a lot of residual salts like the old systems used to do. So you really don't have that event as far as too much sodium in the water. Usually it's about the amount of slice of a white bread as far as the sodium. So it's not a big issue, but unfortunately reverse osmosis is the only thing that takes that residual salt out. You can't just filter it through a basic filter. It has to be RO systems or distilling.
So when you talk about the chlorine in the water, and I know we have chlorine in our water here in the Treasure Valley, what are the problems with chlorine? Why is it such a hazard to our health?
That's a great question. Chlorine can be absorbed in a number of different ways. Typically, showering or bathing in chlorine water, you're absorbing it in the biggest organ of your body, your skin. But you got to think about it. The chlorine has to be strong enough to, kill Cryptosporidium, Giardia, which are really hard shell protozoas, which do exist in the water, different water events out here. Also, they don't want outbreaks of cholera, so they have to put some kind of disinfectant in the water in order to keep those events from happening. But it's our responsibility to extract it out before we consume it, drink it, or bathe in it. Because our natural flora and our natural bacteria in our body is a lot more delicate than Giardia and Cryptosporidium. So every time you're taking a drink of water, absorbing the chemicals, you are killing a lot of the natural bacteria.
So let me ask you a question. If this is in the public interest, and we have public officials, and we have a lot of people moving into the Treasure Valley, when's the last time you saw somebody get a notice that after you get the water put in your house, put a chlorine filter on.
Yes, it doesn't happen, and I think what they're looking at more is at the long term of collateral damage from the chlorine versus the outbreak of cholera. I think that's the way they do it.
That's kind of a difficult way to look at it. That's like deciding whether you're going to give somebody the polio vaccine that'll give them polio or they're going to contract it otherwise.
Right. Yeah, I call the chlorine, in my opinion, is slow death. People that drink chlorinated water, it's kind of slow death.
So it's actually a killer in long term.
In long term. Yeah.
I know it's very bad for those who are ill, and for those that
Right.
are dealing with cancer or some other very serious diseases, because it does affect their metabolic systems. But again, I don't understand why the municipalities don't warn people about this. And I will tell you that some of these municipalities have more chlorine in the water than they have in the swimming pools.
Right, and you can see that especially during the season. During the summer season, a couple of things are happening: more construction, more breaking pipes, more dirt and grunge getting into the pipes, so they have to chlorinate the water even more, and also the heat. The heat of the water dissipates the chlorine, even to a point where they have to keep adding more. The municipalities are getting a little bit better. Again, with the population explosion, I don't think our infrastructure was really set up for what was going on. So, and we're in Meridian, and I've watched Meridian water go from really, really bad as far as the total dissolved solids and the manganese and some of the other things in the water to getting better and better as time goes on. So they are trying to do something.
Well, again, I'm just surprised that they don't warn people about this and recommend that they do filter the water. But that's neither here nor there. I guess they're not going to change their ways anytime soon. What is the quality of the water in terms of the chlorine in the Treasure Valley? Is it high? Is it low? Is it about normal? I mean, I'm sure people don't even look at their water reports when they get them.
No, and and you need to look at the water reports. It's not always going to be exact science as far as the reports. I know in some of the years they've had they were penalized for higher rates than they should, like uranium and nitrates. But the chlorine rates vary. And it's really hard to keep track of it because you have to test chlorine right at the site and immediately. You can't take a sample like we normally do for hardness.
Because it dissipates?
It dissipates, correct. So you get a false reading. So you have to test the water right away. So what our philosophy is just have filtration that's going to take it out and then don't worry about it.
So actually the worst way to be dealing with the chlorine is in a hot shower because it's coming out, your pores are open, and it's entering your body.
Correct. That and bathtubs are the worst. Showers are fairly easy to dechlorinate. They make dechlorination filters that you can do, we would call point of use, POU units, which screw right onto the faucets, and you can take the chlorine right out immediately. Bathtubs is the biggest problem because it's kind of hard to do.
So unless you have a whole house filter.
Correct. Right.
And I know how big these filters are because I've seen them. They're almost 2.5 feet long, if not longer. The one on my house is anyway.
Yes. Yeah. Typically it would be the size of a softener unit, which would be a whole house chlorination removal. Some people in some areas have asked for whole house reverse osmosis, which is horrendously expensive and it's a little overkill. But in some situations, sometimes that's all you can do. But boy, that starts out at about $10,000.
I don't want to hear about that. I've done the small ones, so I understand what that's all about. And when you talk about your appliances, I for one have found out that things like my little steamer, when I used to put the old water in there before it was filtered, I would get this corrosion around the element inside. And since I've changed and used nothing but our water now to put in it, there is no corrosion. It's amazing. It's just like putting good stuff or bad stuff into your body. Correct. You either stay healthy or you get sick.
Yes, correct. Yeah, the calcium, the magnesium, which in themselves are actually good minerals, but they become the nuisance minerals, and it becomes acidic even though they are buffers. But once it's surrounded around a heating element or whatever, in a vaporizer or any kind of a heating element, then that crystallizes onto that, and it creates more heat, which is actually what burns the items out.
Yeah, we found that out. And it also affects your water heaters, right?
Most definitely, yes. Because then what happens is you're layering the minerals, or become so large that you're actually having to heat through the minerals in order to heat the water. So the water has to be much hotter eventually. So again, it creates overheating, and then that's what burns out the elements.
So does the chlorine filter actually take some of these minerals out through the process, or is that only done through an RO filter?
No, the minerals like calcium, magnesium, some of the chlorine, even some of the other foreign substances can be removed with a softener. And then post-softener, then you would put a chlorine filter like a carbon tank or a carbon filter block, and that'll take the chlorine out through the whole house if that's what the person wants.
Right. And then attached to that, you would put on what you call a reverse osmosis. We're going to have to take a quick break here. We'll be back in a few minutes. You're listening to Health Conclusions, brought to you by Altrua Health Share, with your host Bob Neugebauer on 580 KIDO AM and 107.5 FM. Welcome back to Health Conclusions on 580 KIDO. We're speaking with Bill Stafford of All About Water, sponsored by AltruaHealthShare.org. So, Bill, we're talking about chlorine. We think we've pretty much gotten through that. We know how bad it is for us, even worse for anybody who's sick in the house, I would presume, so you'd want to keep that out of there. When we talk about taking minerals out of the water, is that a good or a bad thing? Because, aren't the minerals good for your body? Aren't they good for your teeth and for other things?
Very true, they are. But water was never the vehicle for carrying vitamins or minerals. Water was meant as a cleansing agent for the body, to help the bowels, to cool the body down. That's what water's purpose is. Minerals and vitamins come from diet, and people try to avoid that. But diet is the biggest thing for retaining the proper minerals and getting the right minerals.
Now, you talk about the RO filters, taking the minerals out. Do you have people who ask you to put them back in?
Yes, we do, and it can be done in some instances. Depends on, again, if we're dealing with people with severe health issues that are concerned about it, then we can put a mineral filter in, which would pass through the RO and then go through a mineral filter. People can add things to the water to remineralize the water. The thing is anytime you add anything to the water, it's not water anymore. It becomes a solution of whatever you put in it. So just keep in mind, pure, clean water still needs to be drank, even if you are putting minerals into the water.
Is there a difference in the water we find down here and what we find in the mountains?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, pristine spring water is the best you can drink because it's got a balance. It's got buffering agents in it. It runs through rocks and calciums and picks up a lot of nice minerals and dissolves it. The problem with it is it's too the uncertainty of what the contaminants are is a problem because we really don't know where that water is coming from. What's up above it? Where is it? Is it running through an old minefield that used to mine gold or silver and picking up all kinds of chemicals? So even though it looks clean and it doesn't smell or doesn't taste, it could be contaminated. So that's why, yes, if you could find a pristine spring water, it would be the best to drink and the most tasty.
Well, I know that. I used to live up north for quite some time, and I did love the water up there. I've got a question here. Everybody talks about fluoride, and fluoride in the toothpaste, fluoride in the water. They put the fluoride in the water. What is fluoride?
Well, fluoride comes from there's a number of different fluorides. You can have fluoride that comes as a byproduct from different manufacturing. That's one of the fluorides. Then you have like a sodium fluoride, a phosphate fluoride, a stannous fluoride, which would be used in the dental field typically, systemically or brushed on their teeth to prevent cavities. I don't know that I would totally agree with all that as far as the absorption of the fluoride, as far as being good for you. But fluoride affects the thyroid. There is natural fluorine, which is naturally occurring, just like the arsenics and so forth in the ground, which is also something you don't want to get too much of. So, yeah, filtering that would be probably a good idea.
Well, I've learned that fluoride is something that a group of people decided they wanted to put into the water to get rid of a hazardous waste or a waste that they didn't want to deal with. And to do that, they send it out to the different municipalities, and they seem to be able to get rid of it into the water system. But nobody really knows whether it does any good or not. Nobody's ever really been able to tell us that it does prevent tooth decay, except for the FDA, of course. But, they've been lying to us for the last 40 or 50 years, unfortunately. Do you think this is something that people need in the water, or would you consider this a potential hazard?
Personally, I see it as a potential hazard. I don't like any kind of man-made chemicals put in anything that I consume, especially the water. And I don't think it's really, in my opinion, is totally unnecessary. If someone has a caries problems with their teeth, for instance, if that's what it's typically for, then we need to look further into, dietary sources and what's going on with their diet.
I mean, not eating a lot of candy bars.
Yeah, correct. Or just their diet in general, where the body is not able to produce the calcium and protect the teeth. So fluoride is pretty unnecessary unless it's a real bad situation. And then your local dentist typically can do treatments. I am personally really against systemic fluoride, where kids take a fluoride tablet. And I think very minimal applications of fluoride would be somewhat beneficial, but I wouldn't overdo it.
So if fluoride is added to our municipal water supplies, but has been known to be a toxic substance in some cases, and there's no real proof that it helps avoid tooth decay, but because the FDA recommends it to prevent tooth decay, we all seem to have it on our water. How do you get it out of the water?
Well, you have to have specialized filters that take the fluoride out. Again, getting into reverse osmosis, it will remove the fluoride. So that is one modality of filtering that will definitely remove fluoride. And so if that's a concern, then that's the direction you have to go.
So if you want to get rid of the stuff they put into your water to hopefully make you feel better, but is actually making you sick, you have to spend the money to put a filter on to get rid of the same stuff that they're putting in your water.
Yes, that's true.
Sounds kind of dumb to me. But then, of course, I'm there. I have the filter.
Yes.
What type of filters would you install in a normal home? And what's the cost to a consumer to have these filters installed?
Well, it really goes back to whatever level of purity people ask for. City water can be basically filtered with what we call a 3-stage or a 4-stage filter system, extracting the chlorine out and as much of the impurities as we can. And that can run anywhere from installed anywhere between $400 and $500. When you get into reverse osmosis, which is more of the protects us also because it's a certainty that it's going to remove at least 95% of the contaminants, you would be installed somewhere in the neighborhood of $700 to $800, and it goes up from there. It depends on who's doing the work and how many stages you want.
So if you're going to put a 2-stage filter in your house, say chlorine filter for the whole house and an RO filter, your cost estimate is somewhere between $1,200 and $1,500?
Would be, yes. Most of our jobs, if people want chlorine removal, drinking water, and the ability to get rid of the minerals for the damage, you're usually somewhere around $2,900 to $3,500.
Wow. I must have got a bargain.
Yes.
I'm not going to have you come out to my house anytime soon. I just want to let you know. So is this something you recommend if people are coming here from California and they've got all of that clean water out there in California and they're going to move here to Idaho? if they're moving into a new house, would you recommend that they put that filter on right away?
Well, again, it depends on the area, and we'd have to test the water, but most of the areas, the hardness is relatively hard. People in California, they have aqueduct water, so it's a little bit different pH. Although I was born and raised in California, and I grew up with a water softener, so I was always used to one. And those people that didn't have it, you would see the damage all over the appliances.
Well, let's talk for a minute about pH. What effect does that have?
Well, pH is a funny area. The presence of hydrogen is where it stems from, and it's how much alkalinity and acidity is in the water.
And that's important for your body.
Not necessarily.
No.
There's money being made on pH value of water.
Okay.
So therefore, they've made a big deal out of it. You got to remember the buffers in the water, the calcium, the magnesium, the manganese, those are buffers in the water. That will raise the pH of the water and make it more alkaline. As you extract those out, then your water becomes more on the acidic side. But if you look at some of the, as we talked before, some of the stream water and some of the mountain water, that's going to be a lower pH. That might be even in the 6.2s, 6.5s.
That is low.
Well, it's low, but it's again not really an issue in the body. It's the pH value of water, unless it's extremely low, which would be toxic. But you got to remember, high alkaline is just as toxic as low pH. So high pH is just as corrosive as a low pH.
Well, I was just kind of curious because I know that people who are sick, or people especially who have cancer, they are asked to have a certain alkaline level or a pH level that would be more alkaline than it would be acidic, because the acidity has a tendency to allow cancer to grow, and by the same token, alkaline seems to slow it down.
That's a good point. And so we'll spin off a little bit here, because the acidity of the body.
We have to take a quick break. We'll be back in a minute, Bill. You're listening to Health Conclusions, brought to you by Altrua Health Share, with your host, Bob Neugebauer, on 580 KIDO AM and 107.5 FM. Welcome back to Health Conclusions on 580 KIDO. We're speaking with Bill Stafford from All About Water, sponsored by AltruaHealthShare.org. So, Bill, let's get off the pH and let's get on to how difficult it is to put these filters into homes, especially if you're dealing with something like well water and you're out on a prairie somewhere.
Well, it's not real difficult. You have to have again, we test the water thoroughly, especially on well water, for toxins, and that's why we send it out and have a number of parameters tested for the water, because you never know what's in there. We need to know those facts before we even decide on what filters to build. So it takes some time to figure that out, but it's all doable from the incoming water, unless the rates are of the radiologicals or the rates are real high. Then it takes specialty filters to do that.
Now, I'm going to get into something that's a little bit off the beaten path here, but it's something that we're dealing with out in Gem County right now, which has to do with fracking. And it has to do with the gas that permeates into the water supply. What happens when that does occur, and is there a way to clean that water up? And would that require a lot of people to put those filters on, should they happen to have a problem?
The challenge we're having with that right now is the fact that it's proprietary chemicals are being used. So they won't allow us to know exactly what chemicals they are. So it's really hard to know how to extract it out. If in the fracking event that it happens to get into an aquifer, yes, it would definitely affect the drinking water, and it would not be a good thing. But again, until we can find out exactly what the chemicals are, it's really hard to determine what filtration to use. Yes, we could go through a whole process of reverse osmosis and actually even distilling it maybe afterwards, and that's probably the best we can do at this point until we know what the chemicals are.
And could you take most of whatever it was in that water out with the reverse osmosis process, or could there still be chemicals in there? Because you don't know what's in there.
Correct. Yes, there still could be chemicals in there, and you'd have to know what to test for. Even the testing facilities, It's horrendous even with glyphosate, which is from Roundup, which is a big concern nowadays. It's horrendously expensive to test for that, so it's really hard to know really what's in those water samples, so we know how to extract it. RO and then backed up by some kind of other distilling would be the only thing we'd have available today.
So being out here in Idaho is not as safe as everybody would think when you've got things going on like oil drilling and glyphosate being sprayed on a lot of the crops. In fact, it's on 90% of the corn crops now and almost as many of the soybean crops. How do you deal with this stuff? I mean, who is responsible in the ultimate for making sure the water is clean? Is it the municipalities? Is it the state government? Or is it your own private concern that you have to worry about it?
Good question. The Water Quality Act said at one time that the water going to your house needed to be at a purification level, and they would give us different levels of contaminants of how high they could be. Unfortunately, it's only based on a few contaminants and not all the things that it can be. So it's really hard to determine until we can get down to comprehensive testing to know exactly how to take care of that. And ultimately, the person at the end of the line, which is the public, is responsible for it. As far as what they're consuming, they have to take care of it, because whatever line there is, whatever's going on within their house, they've got to figure out how to take care of it themselves.
Even though you're paying to have that water delivered to your house, you're still the responsible party for making sure that it's something that's drinkable.
Well,
so why do I pay a water bill? For delivery?
For delivery, pretty much, and the infrastructure, and just getting the water there. And they can only go so far unless we want to be spending, $100 a gallon for our water, and people aren't going to go for that. So we can demand a lot of things, but it just depends on how far we're willing to go and pay for water getting to our house. It's much cheaper to try to take care of it on the personal end.
Well, I'm not so sure about, the $100 a gallon, but I know when I go to the airport, it costs me $4 for a bottle. And I just wanted to touch base on another problem we have, which is BPA in the plastic bottles and how that affects the water. And that is not something that's good for you either. What do you think about bottled water? Because so many people buy it. I mean, it's sold by, tens of thousands of cases.
Correct. Well, in my opinion, and again, there's so many on the market, I would have to look at each and every one of them. Any kind of filtration, as I said, is better than just typically drinking out of the tap. They've got to have some regulations in order to do bottled water, but the plastic itself is a concern. The number 2 plastic, which is the milky colored plastic, and all the plastics that are in bottled water are made to break down in the environment. That's why we just heard about China, and they turn down the 7s and the 5s and the 3s. So number 1 and number 2 plastics, the only thing they'll take, it's because that breaks down in the environment. Well, think about it. If it breaks down in the environment, it breaks down and gets into the water. So it would not be a great thing to be drinking bottled water, especially people that reuse one-use bottles.
So that's a bad thing to do. If you've got a bottle and it's distilled water and you're finished with it, the idea is not to refill it. It's to get rid of it.
Most definitely.
No, they never say that on the bottle.
Well, I don't know. In California, they passed a law a while back, and I thought it was nationwide, but there was supposed to be marking on the bottle one use only. And I have seen some of them that do say one use only bottles. Now, the higher grade bottles, the ones we used in bottled water for the kind of stuff we do, or delivered water that comes in the big 5-gallon or 3-gallon bottles, that's a different kind of plastic. That's reusable plastic. Providing it's made, in my opinion, in the United States, because our chemistry is different than Mexico and China. And if you don't expose it to extreme heat or chemicals, you're not going to get any migration of the plastic into the water.
So heat is a factor when it comes to plastic bottles, even the good ones.
Correct. Because remember, all plastic is made of chemicals. So the matrix of the plastic is what retains the chemicals. You distort that matrix, that's when you get the event of possibly having toxins into the water.
So all the people who leave their water in their garage during the summertime and it gets up to 95 degrees in their garage could be causing a problem for themselves?
Depends on what kind of number 1 and number 2 bottles. Probably so. The store-bought water bottles, that would be an issue. The higher-end bottles, the polycarbonates and so forth, would not be as much of an issue. Only direct sunlight where it actually changes the matrix of the bottle.
Okay, so it's direct sunlight that actually
Correct.
changes the chemicals.
Distorts the plastic, correct.
Let's go back to the filters in your house, because I've had mine in there now for 2 years. I replaced them. Is it about every year that you have to replace them, or should they be checked on a regular basis?
Again, it depends on what we're dealing with. If we're dealing with arsenic or some of the real contaminants.
Well, just regular municipal water.
Regular municipal water, once a year is usually what it takes. Once a year, after a year, because you've extracted the chlorine out, you'll start getting a growth of contaminant inside the filters. So that's usually why they say a year.
So it's important to change them.
Yes.
Have you been called out by any chance to any of the areas out in Jim County to check their water with all of the drilling that's going on?
No, not at this point. We know about it, but no, we haven't had too many calls about it, to be honest. Which we should. We should.
Yeah,
have calls.
evidently people don't seem to be too worried about the contaminants yet, but I understand they are supposed to be doing fracking, or they're going to start doing some fracking shortly. And I know it has been a concern to a couple of organizations that are out there. As far as the RO water goes, is it something that you would recommend for everybody?
Not necessarily. It depends on the quality of water they demand. If someone says, I've either got health issues or I'm a water snob and I just don't want any chance of any contaminants, then you go to reverse osmosis. If someone says, hey, I just want it to taste good, then we have a different level of filtering we can do, and it'll make the water taste good and remove a tremendous amount of, contaminants also. It's just not as comprehensive as the reverse osmosis.
So your business is located here in the Treasure Valley?
In Meridian, correct.
In Meridian?
Right.
And how would people get in touch with you if they want to talk to you about their water problems?
Well, they can call the 208-855-2777, or they can look at the website, which is allaboutwateridahospeltout.com, and it gives them a chance to look at a little bit of research, tells us about the process, and that's how they can do it.
Bill, I want to thank you very much for coming in here today. Never talked so much about water in my life. But it was a very interesting conversation, and thank you for offering your insights into the importance of the quality of our water. This is Bob Neugebauer saying goodnight for Healthy Conclusions, and we hope you will join us again at the same time next Sunday for another hour of informative talk about nutrition, exercise, alternative medicine options. And we are sponsored by AltruaHealthShare.org on 580 KIDO AM and 107.5 FM. Good night, and thank you.